have begun.
I would like to invite you to take a trip back into history. In fact, dark history. I would ask you to put yourself into this person's mind, body, and spirit that I'm going to describe to you, and let you answer the question that we will ask you at the end yourself. This is way back, at least 1,000 years ago. My people were living in the forest close to a river. Where they keep their boats, to do their fishing and their raids when they want to bring more wealth into the tribe. As I walk down this lane, it's very, very dark, and I see a glow off in the distance down the trail, and I know there my people will be. I walk up quietly, past the guards. They give me the okay to come in. And there my people are sitting in a great circle with a fire going in the middle. And out in that circle lays the corpse of their chieftain who has fallen in battle. He has to be replaced. The way they will do this, use your imagination to picture this. They will pass a skull, a warrior's skull. The cap is missing because they eat and drink from it. We will pass the skull, each individual around the circle, and they will donate some blood. The shaman will follow the skull. They will hold out their arm. A vein will be nicked. Blood will be allowed to flow all the way around the circle. Blood, more blood. Some of our people even faint from loss of blood. It comes back to me. The chieftain was my brother. I'm chosen to help find his replacement. I will do this by taking a large drink of the cup of blood of my brothers and sisters. Taste iron. The blood of my people is iron. They're strong. And then we'll take the blood within the skull and pour it into a bowl. Imagine this blood trickling down into the bowl, the light of the campfire reflecting on it. Even the smell, you can smell that blood. as the blood transfers into the bowl, look in the bottom, and it just spreads out into one direction. Trickles down that side. It points to another individual. The skull and the blood of my people have chosen the next chief. Would you like to become a chief of this tribe? Think about it. Sweet dreams, brothers and sisters.
I don't know what to say after that. Jerry, you are one hell of a storyteller, my friend.
Well, thank you.
I just saw like a whole movie going on.
You need your own TV
We
show.
couldn't do the effect, obviously, because we aren't all together. But
Yeah.
what the effect would have been was the bowl, 90% of the bowl would have been coated with the hydrophobic fluid. So all of the blood would have run into point to one particular person at the
Oh,
bottom.
Nice,
wow.
nice.
That is
Cool.
That's cool.
Oh man,
Okay.
I would-
Not to take
I
away.
would not want to follow that.
I was going to say
seriously.
no, but not to take away because we have yet another challenger.
Okay, so do I have to highlight two people or just one?
Yeah, yes, sir. Possibly three.
Let me know who
Well,
they.
So we're gonna need a volunteer to assist us. Maybe Mr. Dan Clark would like to play the
Yeah, I'm
play the
the
role
I
of the
can't.
hapless child.
A hapless child, okay. I think I can.
Uh, So if you can only highlight two, highlight Hurley and Dan, and I can just be the voice in your head. That's perfectly fine.
All right, just let me find out where he is.
He might not be visible just yet. I don't know, but as long as he's here,
Oh, there he is.
beautiful. And there he is.
Camera.
Well, that's a good looking skull. That's a good looking dude sitting behind you too.
They're both good looking skulls.
Got a good setup.
Yeah.
So today I would like to take you, much like Jerry, into the past, not quite as far into the past, but into the German past, which is even worse. And so I'm going to tell you a little Germanic folktale that I heard many years ago, and that has kind of stuck with me and has become very useful today. There was a family of four who lived kind of on the edge of the woods. They were a part of a little farming community. There was the father, there was the mother, there was the son, and then there was the mother's mother, the grandmother of the child. And so the child obviously skived off farm work as much as anybody would when they could, spent a lot of time with the grandmother. Now, the grandmother was a very wise woman who would often tell the child, she would teach him about herb lore. She would teach him all these useful things, but she also taught about the warnings. She would say, don't do this on such and such a night of the month, or don't go walking in the woods at night, which is a bit more of a practical one. But one that she was always very insistent on was that if you encounter a ring of mushrooms, you must stay away from it. She would always stress this to the child, and the child would always ask her about it. He would always ask, the ring of mushrooms, tell me more about the ring of mushrooms. And she would say, I can't tell you more about the ring of mushrooms until you've been initiated into kind of the next level of learning and stuff. We don't know if you're going to do that. It's a hidden piece of knowledge. So she couldn't tell him. She would just say, stay away from the ring of mushrooms. But he was always so curious about them. Anyway, as the child grew older, eventually he was about nine, maybe 10 years old, and that's our Dan Clark. And Dan was out in the woods, as often playing, gathering firewood, doing various chores in the woods, when he came upon a clearing that he'd been to 100 times. But this time, in the center of the clearing sat a ring of mushrooms. Now, the child heard the voice of his grandmother in his head. Don't go into the ring of mushrooms. Don't go into the ring of mushrooms. But it was compelled. Each time he would step a little closer, he would hear that voice in his head. Don't still go to the Ring of Mushrooms. Leave the Ring of Mushrooms alone. But his curiosity overwhelmed his willingness to listen to the disembodied voices in his head. And so he got closer and closer. And eventually, one foot after the other, he stepped into the Ring of Mushrooms. Now, nobody's entirely sure what, if you were a third party, you would see if you came into the woods. Would he just be lying there? Would he have disappeared? Nobody can tell you. But what we can tell you is what the child experienced. See, the child found himself whisked away to the land of the fairies. Now, if you know anything about Germanic fairy tales, you know that the fairies and the gnomes are not super nice. And basically, he was taunted and dragged around and made fun of and tortured by all these fairies. And he begged and pleaded them, please let me leave. Please let me leave. Finally, he was brought before the fairy king. And the fairy king, in this case, our man Hurley here, said, I've heard your pleading, I've heard your begging, and you wish to leave our kingdom. I will play a game with you, and if you win the game, you will be allowed to leave, and if not, you will be cursed forever. So our fairy king took out a human skull, full-sized human skull, and placed it before him. And inside the skull were placed these little vials. As you can see, little glass jars. And he said to the child, I have got 5 glass tubes here. I have 4 stones and 1 human tooth. This is actually the first tooth that you ever lost when you were getting older. He said, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to place these stones and this tooth into the vials, and you are going to select the vials. I will let you pick 4, and if you can find your tooth, that will be your link home, and you can go home. So first he placed the tooth into one of the vials. Then the first stone. Then the second, the third, and finally the 4th. And at this point, he said to the child, all right, I would like you to pick one of the glass jars to start with. So, to our wayward child, which of the glass jars would you like to pick?
The bottom.
Bottom? So our fairy king took the jar, poured it out on the table. Unfortunately for our lost child, it was one of the stones. The fairy king looked at him and he said, well, tough luck, but what's the next one?
Top left.
Your left or? That one, okay. All right. So, unfortunately for our Germanic child, it was yet another stone. He said, you've got 2 more choices.
Bottom left. Yes.
Perhaps a little predictably, but also tragically, the young boy chose a 3rd stone. And so the king looked at him and he said, this is your last chance to go home. Which of the jars would you like to pick?
The top one.
So Fairy King took it out, poured it, and of course, as he did, as that stone slid from the jar, the child felt in the depths of his heart a momentary feeling of doom. So the Fairy King looked at the child and he said, unfortunately, you have lost our little game, and so you are going to be cursed for all eternity. The child felt a momentary twinge of fear, but nodded his head and said, I understand, I've lost the game. So the Fairy King finally pulled out the last vial, and if the child looked closely, he would notice for just a moment that in that final vial was also a stone. The Fairy King had cheated, but when the Fairy King turned it over, the stone became the tooth that he had originally poured in. And the little boy understood in that moment that the moment he had stepped across that circle of mushrooms, he was lost. And this is the original Germanic tale of the Tooth Fairy. because that little boy was cursed for all eternity to seek out and find the teeth of children to bring them to the fairy kingdom to try and buy his escape, which unfortunately he never could.
Wow.
Okay. I would not want to be you. So Susan's going to make the call on this one like she usually does.
Okay, get
It takes all the
everybody,
pressure off of me.
get everybody back on screen.
Okay, here we go. Okay, but you do have a category that you are looking for.
Yes. Let me ask you something real quick.
Sure.
Okay. So a couple of things, and I'm going to say that part
Go ahead.
last.
Okay.
The wow for both of the stories in a completely different way. I mean, like story number one, because I don't know who's team one and team two. The story that Jerry told, I literally had a movie going on in my head.
Yes.
And it was really moving, and I could really see everything. And especially when you told me about how the blood would act if this was going on like in a performance. That was amazing. And Jerry tells stories so well. Oh my God.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really like enthralling to hear it. And it was a beautiful story, and it's a story that I could see like actually happening. Like I could really believe if you told me that was recorded in history, I could totally believe that for the to choose the next chieftain.
Yeah.
For the second presentation, I grew up in Michigan, and I used to see fairy rings of mushrooms, and that really took me back too, because we would always be like, it's a fairy ring, and then we would dance in and out of the fairy ring. So that really took me back to that too. And that also reminded me a lot of like like a fairy tale, but like a Grimm's fairy tale, like before they, kitty couched them all for all the
kitty couch,
for all the people that you can't scare my kid, like back when Cinderella's sisters had chopped off their feet to fit into the glass slipper, really good, when they were really good fairy tales. So that made it really difficult, because they were both very enthralling and not funny. A lot of time in these competitions we get funny stories, and I love the funny stories, but neither one were.
Nope. We didn't have anything dirty like we usually do.
Nothing dirty, nothing goofy, nothing funny. This was very, very serious storytelling, and
I'm glad you guys took this one a little bit more serious.
I loved that.
It kind of brings us back down to the bizarre mentalism community being more bizarre.
Yes.
Grateful. So.
I will say this, that I was looking for something special, something different in this Golden Finger Challenge. I was looking for someone who hadn't really presented before. But that's really not, I was looking for that, but that's actually not my deciding factor.
No. Not this time around.
No, because I went into it with that mindset, but I kind of got turned on my head, because they were such great stories.
Okay.
But I will stop going, wow. I have to go with story number 2.
Ooh.
And I think a lot of it has to do with that ancient, the way that fairy stories should be told and used to be told. And it was beautiful, and it was cool. And it reminded me of my childhood, and I loved it. And it was a close call, but well-deserved. Number 2.
Yes. So.
Thank
our
you very much.
winner is-
Congratulations, guys. We pulled it off.
Congratulations, guys.
They cheated.
They cheated. Congratulations, Dan.
Well, yes, we
Technically
did literally cheat.
No question.
Congratulations, guys. Golden Finger after the convention.
Yes, the pro con golden finger.
And Hurley, I'm sure yours doesn't come with flies yet, but give it a couple of days.
You leave that tooth in there long enough, it will.
The tooth in there. That's a good one.
No, I so enjoyed both those stories.
Oh, I did too. I'm glad we got those recorded, man. 'cause we
Yeah.
can play those back.
Yeah.
Really good stories. And I
I'm
can
also,
actually
That was a hard call. That really was a hard call.